Liam Barney began by thanking the Prime Minister and seeking clarity on his opening statement. In 3 years, he wanted people to feel better off. Barney pressed the point. Did that ambition include the poorest 40% of households? The Prime Minister replied with a simple yes. Yet Barney cited troubling forecasts from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, which, after reviewing all measures announced by the government up to the summer, projected that the bottom 40% would not be better off at all. In fact, they could be £1,200 a year worse off. So, what needed to change before the end of Parliament to ensure everyone enjoyed higher living standards? The Prime Minister outlined his plan: drive stronger economic growth, create more wealth, and ensure prosperity reached every part of the country, not just a select few regions. He pointed to measures in the budget and spending review, including raising the living and national wage. But, beyond the political promises, the challenge is stark. Making everyone feel better off within 3 years is an ambitious vision, one that sparks hope after years of stagnation. But delivering it is another matter. The warnings from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, Resolution Foundation, Bank of England, and the Office for Budget Responsibility are not idle speculation. A £1,200 annual loss for the poorest 40% is no small sum. It's the difference between stability and struggle for millions. Families already struggling to make ends may face stark choices: buying groceries or skipping meals, paying rent or falling behind, keeping the heat on or wrapping up in blankets. Rising costs only tighten the squeeze. Council tax up 5%, food prices up 5%, energy up 10%, water up 26%. For those coming off fixed-term mortgages, an extra £1,400 a year feels like a gut punch, while renters see no relief in sight. These aren't just statistics. They represent real people, real families, and real struggles. On paper, the Prime Minister's focus on economic growth makes sense. A stronger economy should mean more jobs, higher wages, and greater opportunities for everyone. But history shows that wealth rarely trickles down without deliberate action to spread it. That's where a poverty strategy becomes essential. The Prime Minister's emphasis on tackling child poverty is a good start. Children growing up in poverty face lifelong disadvantages, poorer health, worse education outcomes, and fewer opportunities. Breaking that cycle will take more than promises. One key piece of the puzzle is wages. The Prime Minister is proud of the national living wage increase, an extra £1 per hour, or about £1,000 a year, for 3 million low-paid workers, is no small thing. Boosting universal credit above inflation is also a lifeline for those on benefits. Yet the Bank of England warns wage growth is slowing, and the Resolution Foundation points out that tax threshold freezes are eroding any gains for the poorest. It's like running up an escalator going down. You're working hard, but not moving forward. That's why Barron's tax cut proposal is attracting attention. Inspired by Australia's approach of aligning capital gains tax with income tax rates, it could raise revenue to ease fiscal pressures and fund cuts for working class families. The idea is bold, putting more money into the pockets of low and middle-income earners without slashing public services, and it's the kind of policy that sparks excitement. But for now, the Prime Minister isn't biting. For now, he's playing it safe, waiting for the Chancellor's autumn budget, a cautious approach, perhaps understandable, but with costs climbing and wages stagnating, people need answers. Now, not later. The cost of living crisis is a ticking time bomb. Council tax up 5%, food prices up 4.5%, energy bills surging 10%, and water bills an eye-watering 26%. These aren't abstract figures. They're daily pressures on households already stretched to the limit. For someone on minimum wage or dependent on benefits, a 10% jump in energy costs can mean choosing between heating their home and buying food, while a 26% rise in water bills feels like a cruel blow to families barely staying afloat. The Prime Minister has announced measures-free childcare starting at 9 months, free school meals, breakfast clubs, limits on school uniform costs, and an expanded warm homes discount for 6 million household steps that could save families thousands and ensure children aren't going to school hungry. But are they enough? The Resolution Foundation says no, forecasting that the poorest half of households will still be £200. Worse off by the next election, a gap the government must urgently address. On disability and poverty, Debbie Abraham's challenge to welfare reforms cut deep. Changes to universal credit and PEEP have sparked fear and anxiety, with the prospect of 250,000 disabled people being pushed into poverty under stricter eligibility rules. A devastating betrayal of Labour's core values of fairness, compassion, and social justice. While the Prime Minister insists that security and support are central to his plans, his assurances remain vague. He points to employer responsibility and isolated pilot programs, yet Abraham's reminder that her region offers just one job for every 333 disabled people highlights the scale of the problem. That's not a gap, it's a chasm. And with 50,000 more people becoming newly disabled each year, the challenge is only growing. By next April, more people risk falling into poverty unless the government acts quickly. Waiting for the Mayfield report or expecting employers to change on their own won't cut it. Disabled people deserve better, and they deserve it now. What's needed is bold, decisive action. While the Prime Minister may have a vision, the path to making life better for everyone is riddled with obstacles. Economic growth is essential, but it must be inclusive. Raising wages and benefits is a start, yet it's meaningless if costs continue to outpace incomes. Tackling poverty and supporting disabled people will require more than pilot programs. They demand a full-scale commitment. Ideas like Barney's tax cut, which aligns capital gains tax with income tax to raise billions while offering relief to working families, are worth serious consideration. Other measures could include freezing council tax increases, capping utility bill hikes, or expanding aid for renters and homeowners hit by mortgage shocks. The child poverty strategy is promising, but must be backed by real funding and tangible action for disabled people. Welfare reforms need rethinking. Cutting support to save money while promising future labor market changes simply isn't good enough. Employers should be incentivized, through tax breaks or grants, to hire and retain disabled workers. And closing the disability employment gap should be treated with the same urgency as boosting economic growth. This is more than a political debate. It's about shaping a society where everyone has a fair shot. The decisions made now will determine whether we close the gap between rich and poor or allow it to grow. The question remains, are the Prime Minister's plans enough, or do we need bolder action? Should we push for a working-class tax cut? And how can we ensure disabled people are fully included, not left behind? The fight for a fairer future is in all our hands. Let's keep the conversation going. Will everyone really be better off? Buckle up. This was no ordinary exchange. In a charged atmosphere, the Prime Minister faced a grilling over their bold vision to make the entire country feel better off within just 3 years. Yet behind the optimism loomed troubling forecasts, soaring bills, and the specter of a deepening poverty crisis. Liam Barney, sharp and unrelenting, cut straight to the point. Prime Minister, you've said your ambition is for people to feel better off. Does that include the poorest 40% of households? Without hesitation, the Prime Minister replied, yes, their voice brimming with conviction, a promise that electrified the room and set the stage for a fiery clash. But Barney wasn't letting go. Citing figures from the respected Joseph Rowntree Foundation, he warned that, despite government measures, the bottom 40% were on track to be £100 to £1,000 worse off by summer. What must change to ensure living standards rise for everyone? He pressed. The Prime Minister, pausing deliberately, insisted on the need to turbocharge economic growth and spread prosperity beyond London and the thick southeast. The budget, they argued, was designed to tackle a tough inheritance, boost the national living wage, and ensure that wealth creation benefited every corner of the country, not just the privileged few. Wages had climbed more in the past 10 months than in the entire previous decade, a clear sign of progress. But Barney wasn't impressed. He knew the real story was buried in the details, and he was ready to dig them out. Beneath the headline figures, the reality was grim. Wage growth stalling, costs soaring. His challenge to the Prime Minister was sharp and relentless. The Bank of England predicted wage growth would slow, while the Joseph Rowntree Foundation warned earnings for the bottom 40% would drop by £700 a year. The Office for Budget Responsibility forecast that real household disposable income would sink to near zero within a couple of years. The Resolution Foundation added that a freeze on tax thresholds would erase any real wage gains for the poorest. And the pressures didn't stop there. Council tax up 5%, food prices up 4.5%, energy bills climbing 10%, water charges surging by 26%, and households coming off fixed-term mortgages facing an extra £1,400 a year by the end of the Parliament. Renters were in no better shape. So, Prime Minister, Barney pressed, with taxes and bills rising faster than wages, what will you do in the next year or two to ensure living standards rise before the next election? The room fell silent. All eyes turned to the Prime Minister in what felt like a make-or-break moment. Steady but urgent, the PM responded. On incomes, they pointed to the biggest lever already pulled, a rise in the minimum wage worth an extra £1,400 a year for around 3 million low-paid workers, alongside universal credit increases above inflation, too. Stressed, the core of the plan was long-term growth. The last 14 years have been a disaster for the economy. We're changing that. We're building a thriving future. The vision was for an economy that lifted everyone, not just the elite, but pushback persisted. Barney wasn't convinced. While he acknowledged these were important steps, he pointed to the Resolution Foundation's review, which concluded that by the next election, the poorest half of households would still be £200 worse off compared to last year. So, Prime Minister, he pressed, what more is needed to ensure higher living standards for all? Without hesitation, the Prime Minister replied that a bold poverty strategy was essential, announcing that a child poverty plan would roll out in the autumn to ensure prosperity reached every corner of society, from major cities to the smallest towns. But Barney wasn't finished. Put more money in people's pockets. On costs, they outlined free childcare from September for children aged 9 months to school age, an expansion of free school meals, new breakfast clubs, a cap on school uniform costs, and the Warm Homes discount extended to 6 million households this winter, double the previous reach, worth £150 off energy bills. But the PM, what about tax cuts? He challenged. If we taxed investment income the same as wages, or adjusted capital gains tax to be fairer, we could raise enough to ease fiscal pressures and deliver a major tax cut for working-class families, like in Australia. Shouldn't that idea stay on the table for the budget? The Prime Minister smiled. Riley, I'm not going to speculate on the budget, they said, adding that the Chancellor would set out her plans in the autumn based on the latest forecasts, but hinting, I hear you, and I'm not ruling anything out. Laughter rippled through the room as Barney grinned, claiming a small victory. Then the focus shifted. Debbie Abrahams, a fierce advocate for disability rights, took the floor, her voice laced with concern. She cited her committee's interim findings on the Pathways to Work inquiry, warning that upcoming universal credit and PP legislation could push 250,000 disabled people into poverty. Even with concessions, she said, the fear and anxiety caused cannot be overstated. What do you say to disabled people who feel betrayed, and what will you do differently? The Prime Minister's expression softened. They spoke earnestly about ensuring disabled people felt secure and supported, insisting this was at the heart of welfare reforms and that the goal was to expand opportunities and support, both from the state and from employers, drawing on inspiring examples they had seen firsthand. The government was taking steps to hire and retain disabled workers, but it wasn't enough. We need to do more, and we will, the Prime Minister said. Abraham pressed harder, pointing out that while ministers spoke of getting more disabled people into work, the reality was stark. Government projections showed that 50,000 newly disabled people would be pushed into poverty next April due to cuts in the universal credit health element. The Charlie Mayfield Review on Employment wouldn't be published until autumn, and Mayfield himself warned it could take years for the labor market to adapt. So, Prime Minister, what will you do in the next 8 months to stop 50,000 disabled people and their families from falling into poverty? She asked. The Prime Minister nodded, insisting the Mayfield report would provide a roadmap for employers, but rejecting the idea that change always takes years. Pilot programs across the country, they argued, were already delivering results without new laws and could be scaled up immediately. Still, Abraham pushed back, highlighting the disparity. In her region, there was just one job for every 333 disabled people, while the South enjoyed a more vibrant economy. This legislation feels punitive, she said, accusing the government of prioritizing Treasury savings over fairness, justice, and compassion values at the heart of labor. So what values will guide your government moving forward? She pressed. The Prime Minister, speaking with passion, said it was a core labor value to tackle unemployment, noting that nearly 1 million young people were neither working nor learning, and that 3 million working-age people were locked out of the labor market for health-related reasons. The system is broken, and we're starting to fix it. I won't pretend we've got everything right, but reform is non-negotiable. Abraham's tone softened, but remained firm. Reform, she agreed, was needed, but not at the expense of struggling households, warning that the changes risked increasing poverty rather than reducing it. As the session ended, the air was charged with unanswered questions, leaving the nation at a crossroads, waiting to see whether the Prime Minister's vision could deliver on its promises. It was a bold vision, but the challenges ahead were formidable. Rising costs, stagnant wages, and a strained disability system painted a bleak backdrop. Yet promises of higher wages, free childcare, expanded benefits, and a comprehensive poverty strategy offered a flicker of hope. The question remained, could these pledges be fulfilled, or would the poorest 40% ultimately be left behind, as the forecasts warned?